Today, inshallah, we'll talk about chapter 2 in the story, because I know that you studied before chapter 1 with Miss Habir, and we will start today from chapter 2, and the title of this chapter is Meeting My Double. We are talking here, of course, about Resendel, and his double will be the King Rodolph V. We'll listen now to the chapter, and then we will talk about the main points. And after that, we will discuss together the questions about this chapter. Let's start. Open your stories.
Chapter 2. Meeting My Double. Waking up relaxed and fresh the next morning, I decided to take a walk in the forest of Zenda and have a look at the hunting lodge, where the king was invited to stay by his brother Michael. I found out from Johann that there was a train from Zenda to Strelsau, so I sent my luggage ahead of me to Strelsau and left the inn after thanking the old woman and her 2 daughters for their generous hospitality. When I climbed up the hill leading to the castle of Zenda, I found out that there was a deep moat surrounding the castle which lay beside a big modern mansion. The only link between the castle and the mansion was a drawbridge that was kept raised most of the time. After such a long walk, I felt tired and sat down under a tree. I kept thinking how fortified the castle was and how intelligent Michael was in protecting his properties. It seemed that I had fallen into a deep sleep when suddenly I was awoken by the sound of voices in serious conversation. There were 2 men in front of me. One of them was short and well-built, with a moustache and small, intelligent-looking blue eyes. His companion was younger and of a medium height with a dark complexion. "What's your name, sir?" asked the elder man, who had the bearing of a former soldier. "Well, you tell me yours first," I replied in a stern tone. "This is Colonel Sapt, and I am Fritz von Thalenheim," said the young man, who added, "We are the king's men. Who are you?" "I am Rudolf Rassendyll from England, and I used to be a soldier in our Queen's army," I replied proudly. "Oh, sorry, sir, for seeming unfriendly, but we were surprised at the great resemblance between you and His Majesty," added Sapt. Just then, another young gentleman appeared from behind the trees. When he approached us, I gasped when I saw how much we looked like each other. "Why do you look like me to that extent? I feel as if I'm looking in a mirror," wondered the king. Sapt then whispered something in his ear, obviously informing him of my identity. "Welcome, cousin, to our country. My apologies for being rude, but your face and hair are really eye-catching," said the king. "What's your destination, brother?" he asked. When I mentioned that I was going to Strelsau to attend the coronation of His Majesty, he laughed ironically and said, "I am dying to see my brother's reaction when he sees us together tomorrow." "I don't think Mr. Rassendyll should attend the coronation, Your Majesty. I think you have to return to your country, sir," Sapt added resolutely. "I understand the situation and will leave at once," I said apologetically. "Before you leave, it would be my honor to invite you to dinner tonight at my brother's hunting lodge," said the king. "I don't run into an old relative every day." Joseph, the king's servant, was waiting for us when we arrived at the hunting lodge after a half-hour walk. Another servant, with an apron around her waist, was at our reception too. I learned later she was the mother of Johann, the duke's servant. The lodge itself was a spacious wooden hut, with walls covered in stuffed reindeer heads, their motionless eyes fixed on us. The floor was covered by the fur of a polar bear, and some hunting rifles were hung over the fireplace. Dinner was served at 9 in the evening. It was a variety of some cold and hot dishes. The food was good and delicious. As we were about to finish our meal, Joseph entered with a big bottle of raspberry juice and mentioned that it was a gift from Duke Michael to his brother. "Don't even expect to get a drop of this bottle," the king addressed us with a grin. "What a thoughtful brother of mine," he added, then lifted the bottle to his lips before completely emptying its contents. After chatting and laughing for some time, we bade one another good night and went to our rooms. I was awoken with a big splash of water on my face. As I struggled to open my eyes, I saw a worried-looking Colonel Sapt holding an empty bucket. The clock hands pointed to 5 o'clock. It was still early morning. "That is not funny, you know," I said angrily. "Sorry, sir, but it was the only way I could bring you back to consciousness. You were in such a deep sleep," said Sapt seriously. He took my arm and led me to the next room. There, Fritz was, squatting beside the king's motionless body, shaking him as he desperately tried to wake him up. But it seemed to be in vain. "Let me check his pulse," I demanded, crouching beside the king. It is weak, and his heartbeat is slow. I wonder what happened to him." "It must have been the juice sent by Michael. For sure it contained some drugs to put him to sleep like this and prevent him from attending the coronation," said Fritz. "Well, let's send for a doctor at once," I cried, alarmed by the lifeless appearance of the king. "There is no doctor in the area, and even 1,000 doctors could do him no good today," said Sapt assertively. "But let's send a message to Strelsau, explaining what has happened to the king," said Fritz. "You're still young and green," said Sapt. "People won't accept any excuses this time. They already think the king is not serious enough. If he doesn't show up at the coronation today, Michael will take his place forever, and our king will end up in prison or at the bottom of a ditch." Then Sapt looked thoughtfully at me and said, "Who knows? Maybe fate sent you here today to take the king's place in the coronation." "What do you mean? Take the king's place in the coronation? Don't even think about that. Me? Never!" I exclaimed. I tried to appear confident, but my shaking hands gave me away. "Are you afraid, sir?" asked Sapt. "I know it's a serious situation that will put all our lives in danger, but we have to act at once. We don't have any time to waste." I thought for only a minute. "Very well, I will do it, sir. I am a risk-taker. We have no other choice."
So the main points here in chapter 2, as you listen to the chapter, the first point is that Resendel decided to pay a visit to the forest of Zenda before going to Strelsau. And then he met by chance Sapt and Fritz, and Sapt and the Fritz were the king's men. And after that, he met the king in the forest of Zenda. The king invited Resendel to have dinner with him at the hunting lodge. And the hunting lodge, as you know, is a house in the forest that is used by hunters. And it was the lodge of Duke Michael. Duke Michael sent the king after that a big bottle of juice, and this bottle of juice contained some drugs that made the king sleep for a long time in order to prevent him from attending the coronation. The king, of course, was drugged, and then Sapt, at the end of the chapter, asked Resendel to take the king's place, and he agreed, but after difficulty, of course. Let's look at the questions of the chapter. The first question here: who did Resendel meet in the forest, and why were they surprised to see him? He met Colonel Sapt and Fritz von Tarlenheim, and then the king. They were surprised because he looked almost exactly like the king. Question number 2, what did the king invite Resendel to do? He invited him to have dinner at his brother's hunting lodge. Question number 3, do you think the king would object? It means here, wouldn't agree to Resendel's taking his place. Why or why not? Of course, I don't think the king would object, as Rasindel saved the country from Duke Michael and his bad plans. The first comment, "What's your destination, brother?" These words were said by King Rodolf Elfberg, or King Rodolf V, to Rodolf Rasindel when he saw him in the forest of Zenda near the hunting lodge. The king wanted to welcome Rasindel when he knew that he was going to Strelsau to attend the coronation, invited him to the hunting lodge. Comment number 2, let's send a message to Strelsau explaining what happened to the king. These words were said by Fritz to Sapt when the king was drugged due to or because of the juice sent by Duke Michael, his half-brother. Sapt didn't agree with Fritz, as people wouldn't accept any excuses that time, as it was the day of coronation. Let's talk about chapter 3. And the title of this chapter is Plan B. Rasindel, of course, accepted to take the king's place, and now the title of this chapter is Plan B. Let's listen.
Chapter 3. Plan B. Time passed like a dream. It was fortunate that Sapt was there to plan everything. "We will go to the palace after the coronation. It's Fritz's responsibility to stay in the king's room and stop anyone from coming in. Then we will ride back to the hunting lodge where Joseph will have prepared the king to return with me to Strelsau. At this time, you can flee back to your country as secretly and quickly as possible." "What about Michael's soldiers, who are supposed to accompany us to Strelsau, sir?" I asked worriedly. "Don't worry, we will move an hour earlier than planned so we don't meet them at the station," answered Sapt. "Let's not waste any time. I will carry the king to the cellar and tell Joseph to keep him out of anybody's reach," he continued. On leaving the room, we saw Johan's mother hurrying away. It seemed that she had overheard our plan, but Sapt looked at us confidently and said, "I will handle this situation. There is no need to worry." Half an hour later, Sapt returned and told us that he had asked Johan's mother about why she had been seen outside the room and what she had heard. She assured Sapt that she had heard nothing, but as a precaution, Sapt had tied her up with some handkerchiefs and kept her locked in a cellar. It was now 6 in the morning. I got myself dressed in the king's uniform. I held his sword and hung it in its holster by my side. I put a revolver in my belt, too. Afterwards, I listened to a short briefing by Sapt, informing me of the king's likes, dislikes, interests, family, and the coronation as well. Feeling somewhat relieved, we all left for the station at 8 a.m. It took 1.5 hours for us to reach the capital city, Strelsau, by train. "The king is hungry," I said, looking at my watch. I felt that I should now act like a real king, and gradually started to feel at ease in my new role. As soon as we finished our breakfast at the station restaurant, preparations for the coronation started at once. People were running in every direction, getting ready for the big event, stopping to shout, "God save the king!" when they saw me. "God save both kings," Sapt replied seriously. Outside the station, I saw a tall, important-looking man with many medals of honor attached to his military uniform. "This is Marshal Strackens," said Sapt. "He is an important man in the army, and this short, thin man is the Chancellor, whose advice you will need." After being introduced to many men who readily accepted me as their king and showed no awareness of my fake identity, I began to feel more confident. I received a message that my brother, Duke Michael, sent his apologies for not meeting me, as he had come down with a sudden illness. He assured me that he would meet us at the cathedral. We mounted our horses while others got into their carriages and started our journey towards the cathedral. The city of Strelsau was divided into the old town and the new one. The old town had narrow streets with run-down, cramped, dirty buildings. The poor people who lived there supported the Duke, wishing him to be the king as he had promised them a better future. On the other hand, the new part that surrounded the old town had modern buildings and clean, wide streets. The rich people living there supported the king and wanted to live under his rule. Why would they want their lives to change? While passing by buildings covered in flags, I noticed a lady standing on the balcony. It was Antoinette de Mauban, my old acquaintance from the train. For a moment, my heartbeat quickened, and I felt that I was going to be discovered. But she said nothing. Ahead of us was the old town. The marshal gave orders to his soldiers to ride beside me for my safety. "Tell your soldiers to ride at least 50 yards in front of me, while you and the others ride behind me," I said in a commanding voice. "These are my people, and I must show them that I trust them," I said. But my words did not reassure Sapt, who looked at me doubtfully. The marshal didn't waste any time commanding his men according to my wishes. Riding through the old town, I noticed some people smiling, while others were making grimaces. Michael's pictures appeared in many of their buildings. I could also hear comments about the colour of my hair, which was the centre of interest for some ladies. Eventually we reached the cathedral, a holy place built of grey stone. The decorative painting on the walls and the ceiling drew my attention for a while, but soon it was the magnificent music that enthralled me. It was grand and rhythmic. I went down an aisle surrounded by people on both sides, waving to me and following my every move with their curious eyes. I was in a dream. I could make out two faces in the distance. One was of a pretty young woman, Princess Flavia with her stylish dress and braided red hair. The other figure was Duke Michael, with his well-built body and dark eyes. His face turned white on shaking hands with me. He wasn't the kind of man who could hide his emotions, and I could easily read the question behind his eyes. Who is this man? All I can remember of the ceremony was the cardinal placing the crown over my head and asking me to repeat some vows after him. "Long live the king! Rudolph V!" all the people inside the cathedral cried. Then started a long and tiring tradition of having my hand kissed, first by Princess Flavia, then Duke Michael, whose hands were shaking. Finally, a long line of ambassadors kissed my hand, promising their loyalty to the crown. My heart nearly stopped when I was approached by the British ambassador, whose family was in close contact with mine. Fortunately, the old man was as blind as a bat, and he didn't recognize me. One of the protocols of the coronation was that the king should go on a ride in a carriage with his future queen. As we travelled through the streets of Strelsau, Princess Flavia looked closely at my face, saying, "You look different today, cousin." "What do you mean?" I wondered. "I mean, you look thinner, tired, and more serious today." "Don't worry. It is just the preparations for the coronation that have made me look like this," I explained. "When are you going to marry her?" one of the bystanders shouted. I wished I had thought to ask Sap the answer to this question. To avoid embarrassment, I quickly changed the subject. On reaching the palace, I heard gunshots and music announcing my arrival. I soon found myself in the dining room, where a gorgeous banquet was prepared for me. The princess was seated on my right, and my brother on my left. Suddenly, I wondered what the real king was doing.
Okay, now let's talk about the main points in chapter 3. And the chapter starts with a plan for the coronation, as Fritz would stay in the king's room in the palace to stop anyone from coming in. And then Sapt, Fritz, and Rassendel, the fake king, went to the train station to take the train to Strelsau. The king received a message from the Duke, his brother, Duke Michael, telling him that he would meet him at the cathedral. Cathedral is a very big church there, and the coronation would start from there. And the city was divided, the city of Strelsau was divided into the old town and the new one. They reached the cathedral, and it was a holy place built of gray stone, where they found their Princess Flavia, Duke Michael, and a lot of people and ambassadors. And of course, Duke Michael was shocked to see Rasindel because he thought that the king wouldn't attend the coronation. Then the king, after the coronation, the cathedral finished, the king went on a ride in a carriage with Princess Flavia, the future queen, who was surprised to see the king looking thinner, tired, and more serious. Now, let's look at the questions. Chapter 3. Question number 1. There were social and local divisions in Strelsau. Explain. The divisions were: in the wide, modern streets lived the rich people, and in the narrow, dirty streets lived the poor people. The new town was for the king, but the old town preferred or supported the duke. Question number 2. Why was Resendel afraid when he saw Madame Antoinette standing on a balcony above him? Because he felt that he was going to be discovered, but she said nothing. Question number 3. When did Rasindel seem to be worried at the coronation? Because when he was approached by the British ambassador, whose family was in close contact with Rasindel's, but fortunately the old man was as blind as a bat, and he wouldn't recognize him, or he didn't recognize him. Comment number 1, don't worry. We will move an hour earlier than planned, so we don't meet them at the station. These words were said by Sapt to Rasindel when Sapt planned everything for Rasindel to be in the place of the king in the coronation. Rasindel was worried and asked Sapt about Michael's soldiers, who were supposed to accompany them to Strelsau, and that was Sapt's reply. Comment number 2, I mean you look thinner, tired, and more serious today. These words were said by Princess Flavia to Rasindel, the false king, when they were going on a ride in a carriage through the streets of Strelsau as one of the protocols of coronation. Flavia noticed that the king Rasindel looked different, but he told her that it was just the preparations for the coronation that had made him look like that. In this way, we finished our 2 chapters today. I'll send you this sheet today, inshallah, and study hard, please. And next time, we'll study chapter 4. See you next time, inshallah. Goodbye. Assalamu alaikum.